There we go. Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for the final show and tell for the taxi licensing alpha. In terms of what we're going to cover today, we're going to look at the alpha structure, how we're putting together the report, and how we ran things throughout the project. We're just going to revisit problem space again, the hypotheses that we tested. So in some way, we're going to just give you a quick little run through of how we did things and what our initial recommendations and outputs are at the end as well, and speak about the benefits, the risks, in particular, looking at some bits which we know need more work, such as the operating models and any further recommendations. So that's what we're going to cover today. So I'll just let a couple of people in. Hello, and I will move on to the next slide. So this is the alpha structure. So essentially, we used this to kind of look at what we were going to do throughout the 12 weeks of the alpha, and also how we were going to kind of break down the reports. So it's as you see on the screen here. So it's obviously, you know, looking at what success means for the project, understanding the landscape, really digging into those, what the user needs are, what desirability is there from our users, and finally, what recommendations we'd like to make and the future vision, and also at the same time looking at feasibility. I will now hand over to Verity.
Thank you, Julia. Hello, everyone. So we entered this project with 5 problem areas that would form the cornerstone of where to begin our research. As you can see here on the slide, we have barriers to timely engagement from license holders. License holders depend upon a range of complex government services, which may have caused overlap, which had to be figured out. Taxi licensing itself being a life cycle and not just a single transaction, it's quite cyclical. Licensing teams having to make sure that drivers remain compliant, which isn't always easy, and licensing team policies on communications as well. Because of this, the problem statement that came out, as you can see, is we believe that digitizing the taxi service will improve outcomes by simplifying this service. It will create a sense of ownership for license holders and streamline the business process as well. Next slide for me, Julia. Thank you. So we had 2 main hypotheses to test, which were simply to make a simple, desirable service and ensuring that that service will be understood by those that it's for. At the core of all of the licensing teams was the desire for the license holders to have an easy way to understand this process, but also to be guided with as much support as possible, and also allow for license holders to interact with an online front door service that would also allow them to self-service themselves. So it was very much a case where at present there's a lot of support. Some have said that there's a lot of hand-holding, and it had to be that this service, whatever comes out of it, must be something that will allow them to self-serve, but also to feel extremely confident. For those with English as a second language, those with dyslexia, and those who are low digital, to really feel like this is something that they can understand and that they can get to grips with. So the experiment that we carried out was our desk research and our round 1 user research. And that was about finding out about the license holders themselves, their needs, their pain points, and also their abilities as well. We wanted to unearth what would stop them from submitting their documents in time so that they can get those licenses, and also anything that they felt stopped them as proactive people from being able to do what they needed to do. So that was an important understanding and information to gain for our round 2 of usability testing. Usability testing for round 2 consisted of a prototype, which my colleague will take you through in a very short while. The prototype was shown to both native English and also English as a second language users and low digital users as well. The prototype had 2 flows or journeys, which they would follow to complete a task. And we also wanted them to feedback on different design elements as well, what they felt was in the right place, what they felt wasn't in the right place, and anything that they felt they would need to see to understand what was in front of them, so that they weren't just stumbling onto a page and not knowing what was exactly what they needed to do on this page. So the usability testing that we did with them very much flowed in line with the hypothesis of improving that desirability, of understanding what they need and making sure that it was simple, clean, efficient, and understandable for those people. So with all of that in mind, with the testing that we did, we were able to come to these conclusions, which you see here, which was that all of the feedback was positive. It was very much that even the English language as English as a second language drivers who, when we showed them the prototype, were very much like they didn't understand it. By the time they finished being walked through it, which is something that we had noted on our own internal analysis board, apologies, we can see here that the feedback was quite positive and that they did also come to us with those suggestions that they wanted us to take and to heed and to put forward. It was very much a case that all of them had different opinions, different things that they felt were not needed and very much what they thought would help to carry this service into being something that would work for all of them. So we did expect to have that feedback from them, and we have compiled it into our final report, which we will be sharing with you. But yes, from testing these solution that we had, we can see that there is good progress that has been made. And I will pass back to Julia.
Thank you very much, Verity. I will pass over to Bradley.
Thank you. I'm Bradley, and I was one of the user researchers alongside Verity and Ash, who carried out some of the research with the end users, including license holders and licensing teams, to kind of understand a bit more around these hypotheses. The first round of research that we did with license holders was broadly around trying to understand the needs and the main pain points of license holders who are going through the process of renewing a license, with a view to trying to identify how we could make that simpler for them to improve self-service, as Verity was mentioning. I won't go through all of the findings from the first round. This is a summary of a summary, if you like, and there's more detail in the written report and also in a detailed report for each round of research, which is in the appendixes of the main report. Some of the areas of needs that were probably already identified, like for example, drivers and license holders definitely have a need for receiving reminders around outstanding tasks that they have to complete as a part of their licensing. An area that could certainly be automated as part of future prototyping of the service. Other areas that we came across, which maybe not necessarily anticipated originally, with license holders, we definitely had the impression from them that it's the process of carrying out their first application for a license when they're first becoming a driver, which is where there's a lot more of the complexities involved in the process and more pain points. Some of the forms that they have to carry out can be quite detailed, and in particular for drivers with accessibility needs like dyslexia, they can present a lot of difficult, or English as a second language can present more difficulties for them in terms of understanding what is needed. For most drivers, or rather for drivers once they've completed an application, however, there are still processes in their life cycle where they might need to apply for new licenses. Like, for example, if they change their vehicle, if they happen to own their vehicle, they need to apply for a vehicle license. They might change the license and need to apply for that. So being able to apply for licenses in specific contexts still kind of constitutes a part of the renewal process, I suppose, for an existing driver in that respect. One of the main pain points that came out of drivers was a lack of being able to track the progress and the status of their applications and their renewals. So often they might then be given examples of where they're calling up licensing teams because they want to understand where in the process their application is, because maybe, for example, they're getting a bit nervous about the upcoming renewal date and maybe not being able to drive on the road if it's not met in time. Again, this is something which we also looked at in the future prototype around making that transparent and hopefully reducing the need for licensing teams to answer those kinds of inquiries as well. There was definitely a need from drivers to have, if you like, everything in one place, because there's other aspects of their application renewals, like around MOT and DBS and medical checks. And there's certainly a need for them to have like one place where they can go to carry out all of these different checks. And certain other pain points can be introduced like that, like maybe delays, say in the DBS or with the postal services when they're carrying out their tasks in relation to this, or maybe not receiving reminders from those particular organisations in relation to DBS or medical checks, which could be carried out if it was under one portal. There's some pain points as well around drivers in terms of having access to the technology that might be required to complete their applications renewals. So a lot of them might have been speaking about the need for a printer or scanner. Some drivers are not technically savvy in that respect and kind of need to go into the local councils to do that, or might not have easy access to this kind of technology and might be needing to go to local libraries or other places to carry it out. And also also highlighted a need around being able to immediately know when they've made like mistakes or in their applications or renewals, to avoid delays in the application in terms of things being pushed back to them while an encroaching date is coming. If you could move on to next slide. If you can move on to next slide, sorry, Julio.
I did press it. Has it not moved? It is. Yeah, this is the next slide. License holders with low visual skills. Can you not see that?
I can still see. Oh, here we go. It's changed now. Thank you. Something which I think was already known, highlighted by the licensing teams, is that there is a big population of license holders who have a range of either accessibility needs, such as dyslexia, language barriers, such as English as second language, or have low digital skills or confidence. It's hard to put an exact number on this, and it's something which can come from future recommendations around quantitative work. But I'd say in the rounds of research that we did, it could represent as many as 10 to 20% of the people that we were speaking to when we were carrying out the qualitative research. And their needs will be particularly important to factor into this service moving forward, to make sure that it's inclusive and accessible for all drivers. Some of the kind of pain points that were highlighted around this group and the overall population was a kind of need for being able to speak to or getting a response from licensing teams in a faster way, having access to support from licensing teams or others to be able to complete their renewals, particularly where online solutions or technologies might be involved for low digital users. If payments are factored into this service, some might need support with cashless payments, and in particular for drivers with English as second language or those with accessibility needs like dyslexia. There are a lot of pain points around the detail of certain application forms and needing them to be simple, streamlined, and using quite simple and accessible language. If we move on to the next slide. And I think I'm probably going to need to share my screen here. So what we did off the back of the first round of research was we iterated a prototype of what an online digital service could look like. And as a part of the second round of testing, we focused on showing that to users, letting them have a go at using it and getting their feedback. I'm just going to share my screen on the prototype. I'll just give you 1 second. This was developed by our colleague Ash. I'll only go through it quickly as I think it's been demoed in a previous show and tell. But its focuses on a task-based system. So these would be detailing all the tasks that would be needed in order to complete a renewal. In this case, it's just got a few placeholder tasks for submitting a share code for the DVLA driving license, and also for uploading a copy of passport. We did get feedback from some users that was something unexpected, but at the very least it prototyped what a kind of image or document submission process could look like. It's got quite a simple task-based structure. There's tasks here with statuses showing the urgency of the task and the date by which it's needed. That once a driver would go into and complete a task, in this case submitting a share code with a little bit of tips on what they might need to do in order to complete the task, they would submit the share code once they'd completed that, and then it would take it into pending. So then tasks here would be submitted for review by the licensing teams with just a bit of information of when that was submitted for drivers and a status update that is in review to answer the need around them needing to understand the status of an application. And once the licensing teams had gotten to the task and had confirmed it, it would move into completed, where again the license holder would get a confirmation that their task has been completed and has been approved. So that's overall based on a simple task-based system. There's also sections to display the information for the current license that they hold, sections for applying a new license, which are not fleshed out at this time, but there is a placeholder should the process of applying for new licenses be supported by this service. And there's a profile and settings page where they're able to keep their personal information up to date and also their preferences around how they would receive reminders and communication from the licensing teams on their application. I will quickly now go back to the Show&Tell presentation. 1 second.
Yeah, I can share it. I can get that back up on my screen. Don't worry.
Sure, go ahead.
Round 2 on so yes, what we've got round 2 findings.
So what we did was we went out to each of the council locations, North Tyneside, Basingstoke, Rushmore. We mostly engaged in pop-up research, where with the accompaniment of the licensing teams, we went out and spoke to drivers on the streets with an iPad device to show them this prototype, to let them have a go at using it on their own, to assess how usable it was by them. And also just to probe into other areas to understand what their expectations would be for how those would work. Like say the login or the process of receiving reminders and these other areas. The good news with the application was that when it was tested, a majority of both drivers and operators, this was out of a total sample size of 17 users, 6 were operators, 11 were drivers. But the majority of them found the application quite simple to use, were able to work it out on their own. And felt importantly that it would save them time. Drivers highlighted this out of not as it being the case that it would mean that they wouldn't need to travel to council offices in order to carry out the renewals, and it would save them time in that respect. And also allowing them to be able to complete it on their own, they also felt would speed up the process for them. So that was some of the good news. They found the task-based system relatively simple to pick up and use. And of those probed, they felt it would improve the current service for them, reducing paperwork and making it more simple. The kind of common issues that some people ran into when using the prototype was mostly around the pending page, if you recall. So a task is in the to-do column, it gets completed, it moves into the pending column. Quite commonly, more drivers and operators would get confused when they reach that page, not being necessarily sure if more was needed for them on that task, not initially understanding the purpose of the pending column, and maybe becoming a bit confused on how to get back to the to-do list to continue completing tasks. So in terms of usability, that might be one of the main areas that needs to be re-examined when the prototype is iterated. In terms of expectations around reminders, both drivers and operator groups had expectations that they would be receiving reminders for any outstanding task that would be there on the list, and also reminders for any kind of status change in a task. So say if it had been moved to completed by the licensing team, or if it had been moved back to them because changes need to be made, that they'd be receiving reminders for those areas as well. If you go to the next page, that's the good news. Again, it's important to acknowledge that from the drivers we spoke to, around 10 to 20% fell within the category of having either low digital confidence or other areas like dyslexia that would impact their use of technology. There were certainly drivers in those groups that we spoke to where when we gave them the iPad to use, there was definitely a sense of overwhelm and them not being able to use it on their own and needing quite a lot of hand-holding from us present to help guide them through the application. Some being in a way completely confused by what would be needed to be done in that respect. this was when presented to them on a tablet device, and of those, when we asked them about it, they basically said to us that they would be looking for someone else to support them in completing the application if it had to be done on that kind of service. So some of them mentioned family members who would help them in that respect. Some of them mentioned going into the operator's office and that they would help them, or others mentioned that they would be expecting that the council licensing teams would be able to support them in doing it online. So we definitely encountered these people in terms of the qualitative sample of people we spoke to. It's important to also recognise that there's a lot of people, both drivers and operators, where when we spoke to them might have mentioned anxieties around low digital drivers that they were aware of, who they were anticipating might struggle with this kind of service. Again, we haven't exactly quantified what number of the population that represents. That would be something which will fall into the future recommendations when we get to that section in this show and tell. But some areas that they mentioned that would be helpful for us to explore would be training courses, which could be a part of the rolling out of a service like this, the training courses for drivers to come in and learn how to use these kind of systems themselves, step-by-step guides or direct assistance from licensing teams for those end users who particularly need that kind of support. Other good news is of operators that we spoke to, most of them indicated that they were quite comfortable and happy to support drivers who had low digital confidence, language barriers or other kinds of needs. All operators that we spoke to generally had a higher level of digital confidence and were quite confident at using it themselves and felt that they could assist drivers in their fleets with these kinds of tasks, basically by sitting down with them in the offices and carrying out the renewals with them directly. Both the operators and the drivers supported the idea that a service like this, it would be valuable if it was a mobile first application, as they have the perception that a lot of drivers have their own smart devices and might be accustomed to using mobile apps as a part of their role as being a driver. So they were favourable of this being an app, as they felt that more drivers might be familiar with that. And it's important to bear in mind that of the drivers we did speak to who did have low digital confidence, they were using an iPad, they weren't using a mobile phone, and those people did indicate that a smart device is something they're more familiar with. So it will also come into the future recommendations that it'd be important to test what a mobile first solution looks like and how receptive low digital drivers would be to using a system like that. If we go to next slide. Last one from me. So that was in terms of the findings around speaking with license holders. In terms of what was done with licensing teams, we had a few hypotheses that we wanted to test. If it was possible for us to create alignment within the councils to realise a more streamlined and efficient service, and if we could create specific services that are aligned to each of the councils to realise that more streamlined and efficient service. The way in which we carried out the research to explore these hypotheses was through interviews with the licensing teams. Because due to the number of people that are in the licensing teams, we're able to engage with most people across the Basingstoke, Rushmore and North Tyneside licensing teams as a part of that, and creating what are called service blueprints that kind of map out the process flows that licensing teams carry out when they're doing license renewals. And we have service maps for each of the different councils to map out what we learned from those interviews in terms of how they work and what their workflows are for renewals. The overall conclusion that we took from these interviews was that there's definitely a common foundation that can be built upon in terms of a common service that licensing teams across different councils could use. And the main differences with the licensing teams is mostly around their ways of working. So, for example, they might be using common systems, but they might have different approaches to how they use those systems. We personally felt from what we could see that there would be a lot of effort involved in trying to create an alignment in terms of that kind of way of working and workflow. And maybe perhaps more effort than would be valuable, and that for the beta, what we would be looking to do is work with the common foundations of a common system that they're using, and then try to accommodate these differences within the flexibility of the model being created. That's all from me, so I'll hand over to Julio, I believe.
Thank you so much, Bradley. I'm conscious that we've gone through quite a lot so far. I just wanted to say and remind everybody that you can please put your hand up at any point if you've got any questions now. I'm happy to take them. We don't have to wait to the end, but I just wanted to give you all the opportunity to just see if there were any questions at this point. I'm not seeing a hand up at the moment, so I will keep going. Thank you. In terms of the solution, so we've kind of spoken about this already. I won't go into too much detail, but it's, the vision was to have a one-stop shop for license holders to see what's required during the life of their license, give visibility and clarity to the license holder and licensing team, and improve communication effectively between both parties. In terms of the future vision, obviously, it would be great if for this to become the go-to service for all license holder needs. It could become the preferred platform of communication instead of phone calls, etc. And it could be leveraged as a potential service for other areas of licensing, for example. And we want this experience to be not a burden at all for the license holders, but something that they want to use. And obviously, in doing so, that means the public safety and transport safety is very much in the forefront. And ideally, if we build on this, we want it to become the standard for the taxi trade and integrate with any either wider taxi landscape, other third-party apps or gov.uk services, for example. That's where it could go really high level in the future. In terms of the qualitative benefits, obviously we've touched on this. We want to modernize communication with the taxi trade. We want to increase visibility and transparency for those who are license holders, and we want to remove anything that gets in the way of the proactivity of the license holders, so that they are able to do things like check what their current status is without having to do that via email or a phone call, and have a solution that is scalable and can be rolled out to further and further councils. In terms of the quantitative benefits, we spent some time on this, and there is still very much some work here to do. But we mentioned the product goals at the very start of the projects. There were reduced time and back-end processes that directly impact license holders, create a simplified and desirable service for managing licenses, and improve proactiveness of license holders. So what we've done in relation to those points is see what metrics we can use, so that we can start looking at what is it like right now versus as we build the service, where are we likely to see increases or decreases or change. So for example, we'd want to see a reduction in cost and time spent chasing to ensure license validity. We'd want to increase staff time availability to use on other more proactive license administration. We want a reduction in the number of drivers going through an escalation process to ensure license validity, a reduction in the number of suspensions due to failure of compliance, and a reduction in the number of new applications that are processed because of a missed renewal date. So those are the things that we are still kind of trying to get data for. Alex, I don't know if you want to come in here and add anything. You don't have to.
No, that's great. That's great. Thanks.
Okay, brilliant. So in terms of the risks, so there are a number of risks that we're looking at. Obviously, integration with the back-end process and how the systems are interacting within the different councils is quite high risk, and we must do this in order for it to work. Drivers with a high number of licenses, again, that's something we'll look at the beta phase. It's high risk and it must be done. In terms of testing with other councils, we'd want to do that again at the beta phase, and also there may be some alpha work involved here to maybe look at a different kind of the sorts of processes we weren't able to look at in this alpha, which is for new applications or operator needs arising from the operator and employee driver relationship. So that's a list of things basically that need to be explored further, and which phases they could be in order for us to de-risk some of these points. In terms of a GDS due diligence, so obviously we follow the government digital service standards. We've got all the criteria listed on screen there. I won't go through it one by one, but what I will say is that something that we know we need to look at further is to solving a whole problem for users. We know that new applications and payments is something that came up a lot during the user research that was conducted, which we touched on. And to solve the whole problem, those elements will be need to considered and iterate on as part of the live service, and obviously we weren't able to do that within the time that we had, but we very much believe that we met the other points. This project didn't go through a service standard, but it's likely to if we need to move forward through the phases of the GDS life cycle, which is discovery, alpha, beta, and live. So I'll move over to the next slide. So with the beta scope, some of the things we're looking at is in terms of now license details, setting reminders we've touched on, configuring reminder preferences, which you would have seen from the prototypes, submitting documents, contacting the license team, making payments, testing with other councils, ability to see progress, and visualizing a high number of licenses. So what we've done here is we've covered what we've got now, plus some of the other things we do know we want to test next. So that's in the now section. And then obviously after that, we look at new applications, and then for an additional alpha phase. And then later on, we may want to consider what the operator needs, how documents can be stored, and how can we capture feedback from people using the service through a link or something, so that we can kind of start getting that feedback as people are using the service, that we constantly iterate. In terms of the operating model options, we looked at 3 here. Zyzi, this still needs some more work. We know that there needs to be some more alignment done between councils on what the right thing could be as a whole, but Zyzi do recommend option 3, and this is really a big part of this is around the technical architecture about a multi-tenancy setup, which really basically means that there's a single instance of software and it serves multiple customers, which are known as tenants, so that we can kind of so that it's more easy to kind of administer the service. But that obviously would need more streamlining. And clearly that we touched on that earlier. We know that different councils have different way of working, so that could be tricky, but we would like to align wherever possible. Sayed, I don't know if you want to add any more to that.
No, I think you've pretty much covered it. That's probably at the level of detail. I'm happy to take any questions on this topic if anyone has any, of course.
Okay, fab. Thanks, Sayed. Yeah, and please feel free to ask questions and come in. Yes, Tom.
Yeah, great. Excellent work. Thank you very much. Really good user research. So question around your option 3 is, are you considering that essentially being like a software as a service with Zyzi being the service provider?
Yeah, I'll leave that one for Sayed or Alex. Alex, do you want to come in?
Sorry, Alex, do you want to jump in? I didn't put my hand up.
Yeah, I mean, but from my point of view, it's great that through this a set of options have been identified. But I think where we are now with the partners, people like Yussi who are in the call from Basingstoke, we're now talking about how these look with kind of our strategic goals, how the different authorities think they will be able to collaborate together. So yeah, it's still something that we need to discuss more and think through. But obviously, yes, so you may have something to say about why Zyzi have picked upon this one as one they think really fits the brief. Said?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit on that. Basically, we looked at the potential ways of going from the alpha through a beta to a live system. And the technical architecture we've recommended relies on some pretty standard cloud computing options using serverless functions. And that can be done either once, and every council kind of makes use of that shared code base and shared infrastructure to run it, and then that allows the future of that service to kind of be managed in a fairly streamlined way. You have a single team responsible for updating it, keeping up with legislation, and rolling new councils potentially into that service. The alternative approaches, which are kind of all the way to, every council does their own thing with their own teams and builds their own version of the service, seem less effective to us in terms of kind of scaling the service out, in terms of building a single cost-based effectively with just one set of infrastructure, one code base that's managed. And I think from a governance and other aspects, it seemed like the optimal solution for a number of councils. But obviously there is a trade-off there, because not only does there have to be agreement about what that team shape looks like and where the resources come from to supply that team, but also some of the processes around within the digital service, not necessarily in the back office processes, but within the digital service, have to be streamlined to really make it efficient. So some of the divergence might have to kind of be managed. And then there'd still be a bit of work to do with the integration of back office services, with different councils having to take some of the data that the service will provide and also provide some of the data in a fairly disparate ways of working that exist, even though there are some common technical elements such as the use of IDOC's uniform in the councils that we looked at. So hopefully that answers your questions, Tom.
Yes, it does, and I'd have more questions, but not necessarily for this conversation. It's really good what you're doing, and it's good that SAISI sees something there that they feel is worth investment, their time and effort in. It ties in with a few other projects that we've funded, and there's some questions around governance and working in the open, and we've funded up to a certain point. As you know, we're in this slight pause mode in terms of like potentially funding things into betas and discoveries into alphas. But we want you to support this because we've put some funding into this point. But there's also, I'm interested, what could be done. Like, can you publish the design patterns? Is this something adoptable? Because it'd be great if there were other people that could. Other agencies that could support this work, because that's one of the fears and risks that we get from councils is if there's only one supplier developing and offering a software as a service, then if something happens to them, then they're a bit stuck. We can have another meeting about this.
Yeah, I will say that obviously one way that government protects itself from just that kind of issue is by working in the open and making everything open source. So any solution that we would do would have to be publicly available, the source code with sufficient documentation. So it's not just, I think the barrier to entry into this particular space around cloud is fairly low. What I think the challenge is just building those relationships and understanding the problem domain, which hopefully this alpha helps address. So I think from in terms of complexity, is probably the least complex one I've looked at, where I would think that it would be a difficult ask to change suppliers down the line. I think the bigger challenge is obviously around the back office stuff, but that I think the councils are aware of. You see?
Thanks, guys. It's really interesting and good progress. There's something that you just see in there that just makes me wonder a little bit. I appreciate that you're recommending the option 3 as a preferred operating model, and to your point, it makes a lot of sense. I can see the argument around the sole supplier as well, and also kind of working in open and sharing. Now, of course, working in the spirit of an open source, making the code publicly available, making the service publicly available, i.e. download, put it into your own repository and continue. How would you govern the growth so that you would get the benefits from that option 3? Because basically there is no barrier between option 2 and 3. So a capable council could easily take the option 2 and go on their own way. Or am I just paranoid in here? Because I think that that's the gray area that I'm balancing at the moment, that is it 2 or 3 that I'm looking at.
So if I can address that a little bit, I think if we look at some of the central government kind of open source projects that are available, and the idea is obviously that, yes, you can pick that up and go your own way. And with this case, I think there would be an expectation. It's a government license, so all the usual stipulations around sharing back what you do and so on. I think the question really is, given the different IT landscapes within the councils, different readiness to engineer the solution, does a pooling of resources work best to get that across? And I think from what I understand of the 4 councils we've worked with and potential other councils, that in a lot of cases it will work better if there is a pooling of resources and a single service built. And then because that is open source, the question for future councils will be, do I pick up the code and do my own thing with it, or do I, you know, chip in or however get involved in this project and that become another tenant in the infrastructure? That calculation's too early to say, but I suspect the calculation of having a fairly streamlined digital service and asking to be onboarded under that will be a lot better than getting your own engineers to kind of look at this thing, build it up, put it, customize it, configure it accordingly, and then also manage the infrastructure that supports it. I think generally the mutual approach works out less effort, and then if it get off the ground, it tends to be more and more cost effective for future councils than it would be to do their own thing. So I think my worry wouldn't be so much whether they'd come and just do their own thing, but whether there's enough of an impetus at the beginning to start this as a joint venture.
Yeah, and I guess if I continue on that one, I see your point and agree. However, I'm still thinking about that if you imagine a growth scenario in here where you're having 15 councils using the platform, and out of those 15, you're having 7 under the common shared governance model and then on the common framework, and 8 going and doing their own way, then there's a question over the scalability, cost, benefits, what is actually value for money. So the scenario that you described, that is absolutely the ideal, and I'm strongly in favor of that world myself, working from shared platform, pooling the resources, but having managed the shared IT service between 2 councils in the past, that theory does not always work in the terms of priorities and the focus and the effort and the ambitions, and most importantly, ambitions, I think. So it's just, I'm just still trying to test that one. How would the future growth scenario look if this should, be a success story, which it can very well be.
Yeah, those are all valid, good concerns and good things to be talking about. I don't have the answers to those right now, as you might expect. I think there is still, to me, there are ways that I think particularly the core of this digital service seems to be fairly well defined and could be applicable across things. So perhaps that reduces a lot of the governance. I think if the ambition was to extend it to the way the back office and offline processes work, then we'd have a difficulty. Alex, I'll tag you in now.
Thanks. Perhaps to advocate for Ariba, our product manager, who isn't here unfortunately today. Yes, it wasn't strictly within the kind of things that we needed to explore in the South was which model should we go for, but we've certainly shown that there are viable models, and it's as you were touching on there, so the crucial thing is that we've got enough alignment in terms of what people expect from the service and how the councils need to work with it to be confident that these models would work in that kind of practical sense. But yes, more thought on collaboration, how we actually technically might deliver this, which is what the partners will be continuing to discuss and work on over the coming weeks, I think. Back to you, Julia.
Brilliant, thank you, and thank you so much for all the questions. We knew this was going to be quite a topical one. Okay, I'm handing over to Verity now to talk about the recommendations.
Thanks, Julia. So our recommendations are split between qualitative and quantitative user research. So I want to go through one of each. We would recommend that further prototype testing be conducted with mobile devices to measure any changes in how low digital users adapt to this new application. This is because we have identified that whilst low digital users are generally very wary of computers, laptops, and anything technical, as Bradley said earlier, they all use a PDA to conduct their business, and this requires some form of digital use. Some of the drivers didn't quite think of it that way. If they can use a PDA and become accustomed to it, we can hope that with the use of a front door service that's on an app, that they may also gain that confidence that they have currently to be able to accept bookings and to update their operators on any of their movements. The license holders that we spoke to showed us an app on their PDA or their phone, which was good to see that they had had a smartphone with them, but they were also, as I said before, still terrified of that idea of using that computer. And they actually don't see their phones as a computer. They see it as just a phone with this one thing that they can do on it. So we really want to tap into that to help them see that their phone is a computer and that they are using a computer, and it's something that is helping them in their daily life, and it's not something to be afraid of. For the quantitative user research, we would recommend a look at the population size of these same drivers, including English as a second language drivers. It would be key to understand a strong and resolute number figure of how much time will be spent providing support to these users. As we all know, that support isn't just online, it's also offline as well. And so we really need to understand how many users will go from that offline to that online and back and forth, and how and when they would need that support, and put those into some figures that we can use to identify how to go forward. Next slide for me, please, Julia. Thank you. So we ended our alpha phase with several future recommendations for both future logistics and also in-person research to continue to make this project successful. Bradley has been through a few of those previously, but with future in-person research, we learned that the best approach was to conduct sessions on very neutral ground, away completely from the licensing teams and away from the council offices. We had the most success at taxi ranks and also operator offices, where drivers felt less pressure and less worried about saying the wrong thing. We also felt that they felt more comfortable being right next to their vehicles, and also some of them showed us their license plates and explained how it worked. So it was a bit more natural and a bit more easygoing, and they felt that. And when they felt that, they were more open to speaking to us. But we would also recommend a form of incentive. It can be difficult to ask drivers to step off the road and to not take any potential fares if they aren't getting some kind of thanks. We were very strict when we were on the street. We said to them, if you do have a fare, please leave and go and make sure that you're doing what you need to do. But some of the drivers that we spoke to previously had said that it was difficult to book that time off to come down to the office. So going to them was helpful, but also having something for them, we feel, would also be just as helpful as well. For low digital drivers, we did get a chance to speak to them, but we need more time with that one specific group to really understand what it is that makes them low digital, but also what they feel can be done to make them start to warm to it, what they need from a service like the one that we are proposing, but also just understanding how their minds work, how they feel towards tech, and making sure that we do fully understand everything that they need, so that there will be that less support that they need if they understand what's happening. So it's a case of not just giving them this front door service, then leaving them to it because we've made something that's oh so simple, but saying to them with this kind of guide that we want to make sure that you understand what's happening and that you can gain that confidence, and that this is what you can do by yourself before you think of constantly going back to the council. Next slide, please, for me, Julia. Thank you. And so our last one, upon completion of the project, we have 6 considerations for the future that we feel would need to be fully developed to make this a successful live licensing service. I'll just point out 3 of them, but it would be to make sure that there's deeper integration with other gov.uk services, making sure that different parts of their service, such as DBS, is fully cyclical so that they can go back to it and that they can make sure that everything is in hand. As Brady mentioned earlier, one of their biggest bugbears was that they don't know where their application is up to. And so that all goes into place with being able to work with the gov.uk services, even though it's not actually part of it, but they felt that this would be something that would help them to be able to renew their licenses much easier. But we also feel that booking tests and checks online would be quite helpful for them, so that they would be able to rely less on having to go to the licensing teams, but they can see on their own when they have these tests, and they would feel empowered that they are in control of making sure that they're always on top of everything. And that would again take some pressure off of the licensing teams. And third, it would be a document storage system, which was mentioned previously. All of the license holders that we spoke to all said that they would like it if they had the documents in one place that they could go back to again and again. And we agree that this would be quite helpful for them. A document storage system would allow them to find the things that they have to easily, obviously, but it would also mean that in case they don't have something to hand or they can't find something at home, they have that copy in their phone or on their service that they can then present, and it will make the whole thing much easier for them, which would be submissions or proof of address, etc. So really it's about making sure that they have everything to hand, so they never feel like they have to go back and forth. And it would also mean, hopefully, that the licensing teams would also not have to constantly show any kind of documents, but they can give those documents to them. With our future recommendation of our future consideration, sorry, these were all put into place after our first and second round of user testing, and these are considerations that we feel should be tested in whichever phase we undertake next. And that's it for me, so I'll pass back to Julia.
Thank you so much, Verity. And that does take us to the end. Before I ask for any further questions, I just want to say a massive, massive thank you to licensing officers here, all the councils, local digital funds, and the XYZ team. It's been a great collaborative effort, and we managed to get a lot done in those 12 weeks. So thank you so much for all your help, everybody. That we wouldn't have been able to do it without you. And really, we did have a lot of questions about the operating model. I was just wondered if there were any other questions about the project, as we are now obviously at the end. And if there's anything else on your mind that you'd like to ask us. Alex.
I mean, it's in lieu of any questions. I just want to reiterate the thanks that you shared. It's been great the way the councils have come together to help with this work, obviously around a lot of operational challenges that they all face day in and day out. It's not always been easy, but similarly, the XYZ team have been fantastic. I particularly remember the late night train journeys back down from North Tyneside, where people have pivoted their user research to get there and make sure they got the contact with the users and the engagement that we needed. So that was fantastic to see, and everyone on that team put in a massive effort. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you, XYZ.
Yeah.
More than welcome. All right, well, if there aren't any further questions, we can leave it here. But of course, if you do have any further questions, feel free to email me, and we will make sure we'll get those questions answered. But in the meantime, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the week.
Yeah. Cheers.
So much. Well done.
Thanks
Bye,
all.
everyone.
Bye. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well done. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.